On October 12, 1972, a small chartered aircraft took off from Uruguay, South America. This plane is going towards Santiago, the capital of Chile. There were 40 passengers on the plane. The plane has many rugby players who came with their friends and family and are going to Chile for their match, along with 5 crew members. In total, there are 45 passengers. This is an almost 3-hour flight, but the journey includes the vast Andes mountain range. The Andes Mountains in South America are considered the world's longest mountain range. These beautiful mountains were devastating for the passengers in our story. On that day, October 12th, there was a storm in the Andes Mountains. The conditions were getting worse. The storm is very, very dangerous. The captain decided to land somewhere and complete the journey tomorrow because the mountains of the Andes were already very dangerous, and the bad weather made it even more perilous. The plane landed in Mendoza, Argentina, for the night. The next day, on October 13th, the plane took off again at 2:18 p.m. The weather was clear, resulting in a smooth flight for the next hour. At 3:21 p.m., the pilots started descending the plane. The plane was quite close to Santiago, but it was still in the mountains. There were high peaks next to the city. While descending, the plane faced very bad turbulence and began shaking. Meanwhile, clouds gathered around the plane, and the pilot couldn't see anything. The rugby players weren't scared and made jokes about it. Suddenly, the plane alarm went off, and the warning lights began to flash. After the clouds were cleared, the passengers looked out the window and noticed that the plane was perilously close to a mountain. The pilot realized that the plane was moving towards the huge rock. The pilots got panicked and tried to lift the plane. The pilots tried to gain altitude and fly over the mountain. But it's too late. The plane alarm was ringing. The entire rear portion of the plane collided with the mountain while ascending and separating. The rear portion was separated from the plane along with 2 rows of seats, and 3 passengers disappeared into the sky. The plane continued to ascend for a few seconds before it began to descend rapidly. Another collision occurs, resulting in the breaking of the left wing. More passengers were ejected from the plane. Only the front portion of the plane remained and descended into a glacier, sliding down at a speed of 350 kilometers per hour. After dropping to 100 meters, the plane crashed. The entire plane was destroyed, and the passenger seats were torn up from the plane's base. The cockpit was completely crushed, resulting in the immediate deaths of the pilots. The broken aircraft came to lay on an unknown mountain in the Andes at an altitude of 3,570 meters. In total, there were 45 passengers, but 33 of them survived the crash. Many of them were injured, and the crash site location was unknown. It was later discovered that the plane was 80 kilometers stranded from its planned routes. The painful story of survival was just beginning for these individuals. This is the heart-wrenching story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. After crash, the passengers came out, and everywhere they looked, they could only see snow-covered mountains. The first thing they did was bury their friends' and families' dead bodies. Meanwhile, the news of the crash alerted the Chilean authorities, but they didn't know the exact location of the plane crash. Without wasting any time, the authorities launched a search operation involving 4 airplanes. But the main problem is that the plane and the color of the snow are white, making it difficult to find the plane. Both Uruguay and Argentina participated in the search operation, and now 11 aircraft are trying to find Flight 571. Several times, rescue planes flew over the crash site, but despite their signals, the survivors could not catch the attention of the rescuers. As I told you, it is very difficult to find the plane because of the same color. The survivors found lipstick in the luggage bag and used it to write a large SOS on the plane fuselage, but they noticed that they don't have enough lipstick to write SOS. Then, they also made a cross on the snow with the luggage. But still, The rescue plane did not spot them. On October 13th, at night, 5 survivors died, and the remaining were now 28. On October 14th, 3 times, a plane flew over the crash site. The survivors waved, shouted, and tried to get notice from the rescue plane, but they were unsuccessful. On the next day, October 15th, the passengers tried to survive by making snowshoes from the wool of plane seats, melting the ice, and collecting water in the wine bottles. They used luggage to enclose the plane's fuselage to protect against the cold. On October 21st, 8 days after the plane crash, the search team gave up. They believed that the passengers died due to a shortage of food and weather. After 142 hours of search operations, the operation was officially closed. The passengers were declared dead. On October 24th, 11 days after the plane crash, the survivors found a radio in the cockpit. They tried to tune the radio by using an antenna and wire from the broken parts of the plane. The radio started working, and what they heard was very shocking. They heard that the search operation was closed, and they were declared dead. All the survivors are very sad and have lost their last hope of rescue. They also have very little food. They have some chocolate, jars of jam, dry fruits, and dates. When all the food was finished, they started eating cotton and clothes, which made them even sicker. At that time, the survivors' body weight had dropped by 40%. On October 27th, 16 days after the crash that night, a loud sound came, and it was an avalanche. A large amount of snow was coming towards the plane. This avalanche hit the plane with greater force, filling it with snow. Many passengers were suffocated and died. Now only 19 survivors remain. The survivors managed to clear the snow and create space for oxygen. As days passed, the survivors' condition got worse. At that moment, they have 2 options. One is to count their remaining days, and the second is to muster the courage to hike the vertical cliff to the west. On December 12th, 60 days after the plane crash, 3 rugby players decided to hike the western peak, hoping that the other side would lead to Green Valley. The reason behind this decision is that before the plane crash, the co-pilot stated that the aircraft passed through Chile, so they decided to hike the western peak. But their estimation was wrong because, as I told you, the plane was 80 kilometers stranded from their planned route. Without knowing this, they start hiking the peak. It was an excruciating hike, as they had no professional gear and the temperature was minus 30 degrees Celsius. At night, the 3 people wrapped themselves in one makeshift sleeping bag and warm clothes made for the plane's seat, and set out. On the other hand, at the crash site, another avalanche came, and 3 more survivors died. Only 16 remained. After 3 days of continuous hiking, they finally reached the top of the peak. There was no greenery or signs of life. Due to a shortage of food, they decided one person would return to the crash site while the other to continued their journey and found a valley. As planned, one person returned to the crash site while the other two started hiking. After some hiking, they saw that the peaks on the far western horizon were less covered with snow. So, they assumed that they should keep traveling in that direction. They traveled for many days. On December 20th, they finally reached a valley. There was greenery, animals, and a flowing river. They start drinking water from the river. Meanwhile, they spotted a man on horseback across the river. They shouted, but he was unable to communicate because of the noise of the flowing water. He looked at them and shouted back, "Tomorrow." He said that he would come back the next day. The next day, the man came back on horseback and brought paper and pencil with him. He attached the paper and pencil to a stone with the thread and threw it on the other side of the river. One of the survivors wrote their message on paper in Spanish. "I come from the plane that fell in the mountains. I am a Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. I have a wounded friend up there. In the plane, there are still 14 injured people. We have to get out from here quickly. And we don't know how. We don't have any food. We are weak. When are you going to come to fetch us? Please. We cannot even walk. Where are we? He then threw the stone and paper on the other side. And after reading the note, he was shocked. He then went towards the city to tell about the situation. Finally, when he reached the nearest city, the army commander was informed about this, and he contacted the army headquarters in Santiago. Meanwhile, the survivors on the other side of the river were brought to the village to get some rest. As soon as the other people got to know about their story, it became international news. The Chilean Air Force sent 3 helicopters to immediately rescue the survivors. Army officers interviewed the 2 survivors to get information about the crash site. One of the 2 survivors brought the pilot's flight chart with him, and he had plotted the places where they were hiking. On December 22nd, 70 days after the plane crash, to search and rescue helicopters finally found the crash site and saved the remaining survivors. In total, 16 survivors were rescued. They were in terrible conditions like altitude sickness, dehydration, broken bones, and malnutrition, but all of them recovered. This story is a lesson for the world about hope. Where there is a will, there is a way. That's why there is another name for this disaster, which is the miracle of the Andes.